Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. I am joined with Brian Smith, Director of our Compliance Department here at Restaurant Solutions Incorporated. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today. We are here today to talk about year-end. It is quickly approaching. We're just 2 short months away before the end of the year. There's a lot of questions out there from clients, especially with everything that's been going on this year. So we want to make sure that we, kind of go over what they need to be aware of, things that they need to be thinking about as they approach year end. So appreciate you joining us today.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
So let's just start. First question, what can clients start doing right now to prepare for year end?
I think one of the biggest things that they need to do right now is to ensure that all Social Security numbers are correct in the system for employees that received a check in 2020, not just current employees. And that would mean those little red X's that we put on the website. If you don't have any of those, you're doing a good job. The red X means that the Social Security Administration has different information on file for that employee. It does not mean that there's an issue with their employment status or eligibility. It just means the 2 sets of information don't match. I mean, there could be a fat finger on the Social Security number or the birth date, a misspelled name, or perhaps the employee had a name change through a marriage or something like that. So there could be a red X, which indicates that you need to get in there and just make sure that that employee's information is correct. And this will just make the W-2 process much smoother at year end. And I think the most important thing to do is if you do have a Social Security number that is incorrect, or a name or birth date or something like that, please do not create a new employee profile. Just edit the current employee profile that you have and make it correct, and that will fix everything in the system.
And obviously with W-2s just around the corner in January, having that accurate information living in that employee profile will also assist the employee to make sure that they're getting all of the correct information as well when we produce those W-2s.
Absolutely. And this also goes for your 1099 vendors. Make sure that those are properly marked in the system, and that the FEIN, Social Security number, or tax identification number for that 1099 vendor is filled out. With the 1099 vendor, of course, you need to get a W-4, and that's where you would get their tax number.
Now, obviously, we're asking them right now to make sure they're verifying those Social Security numbers, especially before the end of the year. But why would it be important for them to actually enter that Social Security number accurately from the date that they're hired?
That's a great question, Sydney. First off, when a Social Security number is changed in the system, there's a good chance that the unemployment return would need to be amended. And the reason for this is that state unemployment wages and tax, those are reported by the employee's name and Social Security number. Therefore, if the Social Security number is incorrect for that employee, the wages have not been reported under the correct Social Security number. And right now, with unemployment claims at an all-time high, that's very important. Because if it's reported under the wrong Social Security number, that employee couldn't file for unemployment benefits. And then, of course, there's I'm sorry, Cindy. Then, of course, there's the we would have to amend that return to correct it.
And obviously a lot of steps to that, and then you're reporting inaccurately, and then the employee's trying to get certain benefits, and if the wages aren't accurately reported, then they may not be able to get their full benefits. So it's a domino effect is what you're saying.
Exactly. And then, with the W-2s obviously coming up, we would have to create a W-2C or a W-2 correction. Would be required for an employee that had the incorrect Social Security number. And that just slows everyone down. The manager has to send support requests and get that changed. And of course, there's a charge for a W-2C. So any edits that you can make right now will just make year end much more smooth.
And would you recommend that they make sure that all of employees that have been terminated throughout the year are being properly reflected as terminated as well?
Exactly. Same thing.
All right, perfect.
There's nothing in W-2s that would impact, but just for your reporting and looking at your employee list, yeah, you'd want to mark everyone that was terminated.
Great advice. Thank you so much on that. Now, you mentioned 1099, but are there any other tax reports that RSI supplies that are specific to the restaurant industry that they should be aware of?
Absolutely. There's the Form 8027, which is the annual information return of tip income and allocated tips. And this form is filed by traditional restaurants where tipping is customary and normal. That's the legal definition. I like to add a little bit more onto that and say when the server expects a tip, a server knows they're working in a restaurant where tipping is customary and normal, so they expect a tip from each table. And those are the restaurants that would be required to file the 8027. And the allocation of tips happens when claim tips are less than 8% of, here's another word that I've added in there, tippable sales. And really what that means are we're gonna remove to-go sales and any sales that you added a service charge to, because those sales are normally not tipped upon customarily. So the difference between, when we have less than 8 tippable sales, we have an allocation. And the difference between that 8% and what was actually claimed would be allocated to directly tipped employees. And now, just so you know, the restaurants that have 10 or fewer full-time employees or full-time equivalent employees are not required to file the 8027, but I don't think that really impacts many of our clients. That's a really small restaurant.
Are there any steps the client needs to take to ensure that the 8027 process is a smooth process at your end and everything is reported accurately?
Yeah, there are a couple steps that they can take. I think the first thing is to communicate to their employees that 100% of tips received should be claimed. Now, they can't force them to claim the tips, but restaurants should inform their employees that they're required to claim 100% of their tips. And then the other thing that they can do is just ensure that all payroll is recorded under the correct job codes. And when I say that, for example, if a busser who is an indirectly tipped employee was clocked in or somehow was paid under a server job code that is a directly tipped employee, this could cause an issue down the road in the tip allocation because only directly tipped employees are allocated tips. And that busser who is indirectly tipped should not be allocated any tips in this process. But if they clock in or get paid under the wrong job code for whatever reason, it could cause an issue down the road.
So it looks like they just have to be very accurate with how they're handling and accounting for everything, it sounds like.
Absolutely. We can correct this. If you did this in January of 2020, you reported, a busser's wages under server, we can still correct this. We have to avoid that check and reissue it, but it's not the end of the world. We can still fix it.
All right, wonderful. Now, what are the actual requirements for a client when there is a tip allocation?
Well, Sydney, each allocation is slightly different, but the most important thing for our clients to do is respond to the support requests regarding the tip allocation as soon as possible and just stay in communication with RSI until the process is complete. There is a lengthy process of obtaining additional information regarding sales and then the verification after the allocation is made. We like the owner or the GM to look over the allocation to make sure that there's no surprises when those W-2s are handed out. And like I said, this impacts a small percentage of our clients, but an incomplete process will result in the delay of your W-2s because we want to make sure that tip allocation is accurate before we put it on the W-2 and before we release it to the employees.
So I guess what we're saying, folks, is long story short, let's be proactive on making all of this so that way by the time we get to year end, you know that everything's going to be reported accurately on that 8027 report. Now, Brian, we've talked about 8027s, we've talked about 1099s. Are there any other tax reports specific to the restaurant industry that RSI supplies?
Well, there's not any other tax reports, but RSI does supply information to claim what we refer to as the 45B tip credit. A client or a client's tax preparer would fill out IRS Form 8846, which is the credit for employer Social Security and Medicare taxes paid on employee tips, and then file that with their year-end tax return. And the 45B tip credit is a credit for the Social Security and Medicare that restaurants pay on tips and is a dollar for dollar reduction of their tax liability. So it's very important to get this information and provide it to your tax preparer so you can get that credit on your year-end tax return.
All right, fantastic. Now, are there any other year-end tax reports that RSI doesn't produce for our clients?
Yeah, there's just an endless number of tax reports.
I'm sure.
And there are quite a few that we don't produce. And I think the biggest ones are the 1094 and 1095, which are for the ACA reporting. And that ACA reporting, it's a beast all on its own. And RSI uses a third party to file those documents and send them out to your employees. So please know that the 1094 and 1095 for ACA does not come from RSI. It would come from your third party. And that's just because those rules are so complex that all RSI would do is ACA if that's what we
yeah, I remember when that first rolled out, and it was pretty difficult to read through all of that, so no surprise on that one.
Yeah, and then of course, all the business tax returns like your 1065, a partnership return in the associated K1s, an 1120, which is a C corporation return, or an 1120S, which is an S corporation return in the associated K1s. RSI does not produce any of those year-end federal tax returns for our clients. Now, it doesn't say that things won't change in the future, but as it stands right now, RSI doesn't do those federal returns for our clients.
All right. Well, this has been excellent information for myself and hopefully for all of you watching as well. Brian, thank you so much to share this information with us and really to help us set everybody up for success going into year end. After a really difficult year, being able to be prepared for all of this and have everything accurate and ready to go for reporting so we have a seamless transition into 2021. Hopefully will be a banner year for everybody. Has been appreciated. So thank you so much for your time today.
You bet. Thank you, Sydney.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.